Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'm going to try to complete the next 5 verses. That's 17 through, next 4 verses, 17 through 20. So, and again, first in Arabic, then in English. Masalahum ka masali alladhi istaqada naran, falama adarat mahawlahu dhahaba Allahu binurihim wa tarakahum fi zulumatin la yubsirun. Their example is like the example of one who kindled a fire. Then, when it lit up what was around him, God took away their light and left them in darknesses. Not do they see. Summun bukmun umyun fahum la yarjiun. Deaf, dumb, or mute, blind, so they do not return. A kasayibin min al-samayi fihi zulumat or zulumatun wa radun wa barkun yajaluna asabiyahum fi adhanihim min al-sawayik khadara al-mauti wallahu muhitun bil kafirin. Or like a rainstorm from the sky, in it darknesses and thunder and lightning. They put their fingers in their ears from the thunderclaps, in fear of death. And God encompasses the kafirin, the disbelievers, or those who reject the truth. Yaqadu al-barq yaqtafu abswarahum Gulama adara lahum masha fihi wa idha azlama alayhim qamu walau sha'Allah la dhahaba bisamihim wa abswarihim inna Allah ala kulli shayin qadir. Almost the lightning snatches away their sight. Whenever it flashes for them, they walk in it, and when it darkens upon them, they stand. And if God had willed, surely he would have taken away their hearing and their sight. Indeed, God over everything is powerful. So it's a very powerful couple of metaphors. And concluding this section that began in verse 6, describing the kafirin, the rejectors of truth, the hypocrites or munafiq. And one of the things I think that it's bringing home, it's emphasizing a lot of things. There's a lot to unpack, and I'll only be able to unpack some of it, inshallah. But one of the things I think that it's underlining is that the degree, the severity of the crime of these people, and then the severity of God's punishment. So it says in the verse we talked about last time, verse 15, that God is mocking them. Because they mock at God and the believers, God mocks at them, prolongs them in their wrongdoing, and they wander blindly. And so here we get a more concrete, detailed image or images of what that blind wandering is like and what that mockery is like. And in verse 16 from last time, we're told that they, in this kind of cunning way that's actually not cunning but foolish, they've bought wandering with guidance. They've sold the guidance that God has given them, and in order to obtain the privilege to do whatever they want, to wander. And then it says at the end of that verse, so their commerce did not profit them, nor were they guided. And now in these verses, 17 through 20, we see exactly how unprofitable, how disastrous that exchange transaction has been for the kafirin, for the hypocrites, the disbelievers. Because if you can picture this of someone in the middle of nowhere in the desert with a fire, and if the fire is suddenly completely extinguished and the person is in total darkness, this, God is telling us, is what it is like to be a disbeliever, or someone who is in a thunderstorm and the only light that's given them is a kind of destructive light that is almost blinding, and the noise is not words of guidance, but just this violent noise that is almost deafening, and that they actually want to block out. So the only thing that they're able to take in through their senses is something they don't want to take in at all. So these images are obviously reiterating the point already made, that these people are not, they're not in control, they don't have power, and the position of superiority that they pretend to have by mocking at God and the believers is an illusion. And God again and again will inform us about this and remind us of this and try to convince us of this. Not try to, it's up to us to, God doesn't try, but he's he's giving us the opportunity to understand this, that despite the appearance of success and control and power that disbelievers have, they are in fact blind, lost, worse than cattle, worse than rocks in terms of the hardness of their hearts. So going a little bit more into the details of the words here, in verse 17, I think it's interesting if we look at the pronouns. It begins with a plural possessive pronoun, meaning the word there, or in Arabic, so masa lahum. So the hum there is plural, possessive plural, because it's talking about a group of people, namely the kafirs, the munafiq. I don't see any need to distinguish between those two groups of people. Hypocrisy is something that kafirs do. In any case, it's plural. But the metaphor, and when you're talking about metaphor, in terms of literary terms, metaphors always have two parts, right? It's a comparison. So there's the object that you're trying to describe through the comparison, and then the thing that you're comparing it to in order to make a point. And in order to distinguish those two things, literary scholars came up with the terms tenor and vehicle. So tenor is the thing you're trying to describe through the metaphor, and then the vehicle is the thing you're comparing it to. So in this case, the tenor is the kafirs and hypocrites, and the vehicle is, in verse 17, the people around a fire, and then in verse 19 is the people in a thunderstorm. So in any case, the possessive pronoun switches to a singular pronoun because the vehicle is just a single person, I think. Their example is like the example of one who kindled a fire. Then when it lit up his surroundings, or what is around him, so that's singular, not plural. Because again, it's just God's using an image of just a single person, which I guess is more, as a lot of people would say, it's more effective to think of just a single person rather than a group of people around a fire. God took away their light. Now he switches away, even though it still seems to be within that the image, the vehicle of a person sitting on a fire, God, interestingly, transitions seamlessly back to describing the tenor, the kafirs. And so he uses a plural pronoun. God took away binurihim, their light, plural, and left them, watarakahum, plural, in darknesses. Not do they see, again, plural, yubsurun. So this happens a lot where God seamlessly transitions in a way that's very unusual. You would expect the verse to complete the image of the single person sitting at a fire who is then in darkness. But there's that kind of economy and efficiency in the language of the Qur'an, even though it's, of course, also repetitive in a lot of ways, not in a bad way, of course. And we see that here, where there's no wasting of words whatsoever. We get the image, and then immediately, even before the image is completed, going back to the point, which is that God took away their light. Because, of course, there's not, and I think part of the point is that there's not an absolute distinction between the tenor and the vehicle, between the thing that God's describing, namely kafirs, disbelievers, hypocrites, and someone in total darkness. It's almost a literal physical blindness, almost, that kafirs suffer from. And we see that, we saw that already in verse 7. God set a seal over their hearts and over their hearing, and on their vision is a veil, a covering. That's not a metaphor, that's literal. Doesn't mean that the veil is made of cloth, but it's a covering that can't be seen, but it's a real covering. When these people look out the window, look at trees, look at nature, look at their own lives, they're seeing it, but they see it with a covering. There's not an absolute distinction between this metaphorical blindness that God is describing and the literal blindness of a person who's sitting at a fire in the desert. And that's why I think God transitions so quickly back to the plural, describing the collective group of kafirs whose light God has taken away and left them in darknesses they do not see. So then 19, we have the second metaphor, which is in some ways more complicated than the first one, because here God doesn't just take away light, but he gives light, but light that is blinding. I think it says, it's in the next verse where it says the light almost snatches away their sight. And when the light does come, like in the previous metaphor, the light is only just enough to let them take a single step, almost like a kind of mockery, which, we already have this concept of God mocking. These are difficult concepts for, even someone like myself was raised in as a Christian, raised in the Judeo-Christian background. It's, I don't think if you are steeped in the Bible, it may be not so difficult, because in the Bible we do have ideas of God as wrathful, as vengeful, as punishing. We shouldn't say vengeful, because that's not what God is. But of course, I don't know about the Jewish tradition, but the Christian tradition is very much committed to softening that. There's not much softening of that idea of God as the punisher here, and even as the mocker, that he's giving just enough light so that you'll, start walking and then fall into a ditch or something. So again, that metaphor, the second metaphor in verse 19, is somewhat more complicated, but it's elaborating on the previous metaphor. And again, still using the trope of light and darkness, guidance and blindness, but showing throughout that it is God who is in control of light and darkness and blindness and guidance. Our only role is to seek out guidance. And that's where I think the word muttaqin comes from, because we go back to the beginning of the baqarah, and it's saying this is the book, no doubt in it, a guidance for al-muttaqin, which is usually translated, the God-fearing, the God-conscious, but literally that root word there, itaku or taqwa, it comes in different forms, but you have that ta, kaf, just those two letters, I guess, as the core of the word, means to protect, to save, to defend. And we see that in various contexts throughout the Qur'an. So this book gives guidance to those who are trying to protect themselves. Okay? And the absolute opposite of that is people who mock at the very notion that they're in any danger, that there's hell, that God will punish them, that there is a God at all. So that's the real contrast between those who are afraid and who are seeking guidance, seeking protection. That's all we can do. But God is the one who doles out, who gives, sends down guidance, sends light, and also takes it away. The power is entirely His. Our power is only over, do we want guidance? Are we willing to seek it out and to make sacrifices for it?